So now that we got the basic logic of the GameSalad interface, I want to start to take a deeper dive into some of the standard behaviors that are listed in the library. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to focus on displaying dynamic text, and then we're going to shift our focus a bit on keeping track of things like score and having that information displayed dynamically on screen. So again, we're setting up a real simple quiz style game. And the concept is that we'll be presented with individual questions and we'll choose the right or wrong answer. Based on our right answer, it's going to add to our score. If we get the wrong answer, we're going to subtract to the score. Later, we'll keep pushing this forward and we'll make it a two-player game and require two players playing head-to-head to buzz in to answer the question. But for now, what I'd like to do is jump back to the loading screen. And I want to explore a really simple behavior that will allow us to display some simple text. Now, the general concept inside GameSalad is that we always have to attach these behaviors to an actor. And so I want to borrow my loading actor, and I'll just double click on that. And currently my loading actor has a behavior or a logic that's been assigned to it, and it's currently after waiting 3 seconds, then loading the next scene. Well, we also want to do something like display some simple type. So I'm going to scroll down and I'm looking for display text, and I'll just drag and drop that into my scene. And currently the display text properties come up with a default hello world, and I'll just simply call this loading. And so the idea is that when this actor is on screen, not only will it wait 3 seconds to load the screen, but it'll also display some text here. Now we can control some of the parameters of the type. We can tell it, what font to use. I'm going to let the font color default. I'm going to let the size default as well, and we'll see what kind of results we get. Now, it is important to note that as we start to build our logic, that this is kind of a linear workflow. So it's going to start with the logic at the top. Now, it can run different kinds of logic simultaneously, but I want to ensure proper display of this type, so I think that that's something that should come first. So it's definitely going to display the type first and then start its counter function. So just by simply dragging and dropping the display type, now when I go back to my loading screen, I'll just hit the back button, so I'm already looking at my loading screen. You'll notice that nothing is different about the actor. It's still just this kind of boring old square with a light blue cast to it. But when I hit the preview button, now we get some type that's rendering on the scene. It's not pretty, but it's doing its job. And our goal for this part of the project is just to make sure that the mechanics work the way that we want them to. So we're starting with the loading screen. The loading screen is displaying some kind of type, and then it's advancing us to our first question. So everything's working just the way it should. So I'm going to go back to the loading screen, and I'm going to start to establish some additional logic. Now, I want to start to keep track of dynamic variables. And the way that I'll do that is by creating new game level attributes. So you'll notice that in the inspector here, there's game and scene level attributes. And for this project, we always want to focus on game level attributes, meaning that when we change from one scene to the next, we're going to maintain any of the variables from one scene to the next. So for a variable like score, if we're keeping track of a score variable, as we move from scene to scene, that attribute is global inside of our game. And so I'm going to go to the attributes menu. And inside the game level attributes, we have things like the default name. We have a timer, and this timer just runs when the game starts. And so if that provides some value to us, if we want to figure out how long somebody's been playing, we can access the game level time variable. We have things like display size. So this is the actual resolution of our screen here, 1024 by 768. So we're emulating that tablet in a horizontal or a landscape display. And then we have an actor tag field here. What I want to do is I want to create a new attribute. And there are different kinds of attributes. And we're going to focus on really just the first three. There's a Boolean, a text, and an integer. Booleans we can think of as kind of a true, false, or a light switch. It's either on or it's off. Boolean has two functions. It's binary. It's either on or off. Text would be a string of text things like letters and numbers that are not intended to be interpreted as any kind of math. It's just it's whatever strings of type we want to either type in or pull from our game. An integer is an actual number, and a real attribute is also a number, but the difference between the two is that the integer is a round number, a real number is a floating point number, so it's a decimal number, and so it requires a little bit more processor overhead to handle a real number versus an integer. And for things like keeping track of a score, something that's going to be a whole number all the time, 1, 5, 10, something like that, an integer is going to do just fine. So I'm creating a new integer attribute, and I'll choose, and so I now have this new attribute, and its default value is set to 0. And I'm going to call this attribute, I'm going to call it score. Now, ultimately, I'm going to make this game a two-player game, and I want to take that into account. And so what I'll do is I'll simply call this player 1 score. And later on, I'll work out the details of making it a two-player, but my score, even if I just make this just a one-player game, I have some scalability built into the project. So I now have player 1 score, its value is set to 0 by default. And what I'll do is I'll jump over to my question 1 scene. And so this is going to be the basic layout, and I can imagine a question here showing up in the middle of the screen. And I have a button that is going to register a wrong answer. I got two buttons that registers a wrong answer and a green button that registers a right answer. Now, what I need is an actor that's going to display my score value dynamically. So depending on what my score is, I want that to be able to display maybe in the top left-hand corner. At least for the player 1 score, I want that in the top left-hand corner. So what I'll do is I'm going to create a new actor. This actor is going to be called player 1 score, and its job is to sit on the stage and render the score value of the attribute that we just created. Now, I'll double-click inside the actor, and I need to build some real simple logic here. And the logic is very simple. We just want to display some kind of text. Now, or display some kind of information that's numbers or letters. And in this text field, it comes with a default parameter of hello world. We don't want that, so I'm going to delete that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to this little button over on the right, and this allows me to build an expression. Okay, and so what I'll do is I'll just X that out again so we can see this again. I want to load not static type. It's not something that I type in here, but I want to load something dynamically. And so this will be an expression. And the expression that I want to load is I'm going to choose this first little drop-down menu. I'm looking for a game-level attribute. Because remember, when we made this attribute, it was a game-level attribute. And that game-level attribute is player score. So I'll double-click. And so currently what this expression is saying is display in this type field the attribute of player 1 score, and I'll hit the check mark. So whatever the value of player score is set to, it's going to render that to screen with an Arial text at a 30-point size font with a color of white. Now currently my actor is set to a white background, so I actually won't see the text. So I need to make a quick decision about, do I want the text to read a different color? Not really. What I really want to do is I want to set the actor that is being used to display. I want to set that either to, in this case I could set it to black. It would make it look like it wasn't there, but more accurately what I could do is click on the color swatch, and instead of choosing a color, what I could do is down here in the opacity slider, I'll slide that opacity way down to 0. In fact, I'll leave it up a little bit so I can still see my graphic in case I want to move it around. Because we learned earlier that when dynamic text is being displayed on screen, you don't see it until you run the preview of your game. So it'll be helpful to be able to see the button so I can still select it and move it around. Now you might be scratching your head and saying, well, wait a second, if the actor is transparent or has a 0% opaqueness or opacity, how are we going to see the type? Well, the text has a color of white, so it's not going to be rendered as an opaque. It's just the background graphic, and this background graphic is going to be used as a placeholder to render this display text. So I'll close this window. So simply I have an actor with a 10% opacity set to it with a display text attribute. In the text field, I have it displaying the value of an attribute rather than static text, and I'll just hit the back button. I'll go over to my loading scene and, oops, excuse me, I don't want to go to my loading scene. I actually want to go to my question 1 scene. So you can see here, here's that actor. This is our player 1 score actor. It's sitting over here on the left of the screen. And when I hit play, it's now rendering the value of my player score, which is currently set to 0. So in the next presentation, what we'll do is we'll add some functionality to say, okay, well, when I click on the red button, this is a key reminder or an interface cue that I'm actually getting the question wrong, so it should subtract from this value. So whenever I hit a red button, it's going to subtract from score. Whenever I hit the plus button, it's going to add to the score, and we'll do that in the next presentation.